In 2008, Johnny Altinger believed he was about to meet a woman he had recently connected with on a dating site. When he arrived, the door creaked open as if someone had been waiting for him. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, landing on something unsettling, a workbench covered in plastic wrap, with a set of knives neatly arranged beside it. Before he could react, a masked figure emerged from the shadows. Without warning, the stranger lunged at him, striking with brutal force. Johnny fought back, but the attacker was relentless. Blow after blow landed until Johnny collapsed, his life stolen in a matter of moments. The killer wasted no time. He lifted Johnny's body onto the workbench and methodically dismembered him, stuffing the remains into garbage bags before disposing of them in a nearby storm sewer. But he didn't stop there. To avoid suspicion, he broke into Johnny's home, accessed his email, and sent messages to his friends and family. It was meant to put any worries to rest, but not everyone was convinced. One of Johnny's close friends read the message and immediately knew something was wrong. The wording, the tone, none of it sounded like him. Suspicious, he contacted the police, setting off an investigation that would soon expose a horrifying truth. Mark Twitchell, an aspiring filmmaker with a dark obsession. Mark had fantasized about becoming a real-life serial killer, inspired by his favorite TV show Dexter. But his attempt at the perfect crime had been riddled with mistakes, and now the police had everything they needed to arrest him.
How did this influencer mysteriously vanish from a party in Dubai, go missing for 10 days, then turn up at the side of the road, battered and bruised with a broken spine? Maria Kowalchuk is a stunning 20-year-old OF model from Ukraine. And this horrific case hit the headlines on the 19th of March when she showed up at the side of the road absolutely horrifically battered. She'd been missing for a total of 10 days after initially attending a party in a hotel in Dubai on the 9th of March. Now, it's not 100% confirmed what kind of party this is, and a lot of this is hearsay and speculation. Many are wondering whether this was something called a porta potty party. Now, it sounds absolutely horrific to me, but it seems to be a gathering where men urinate and defecate onto a female and pay them a lot of money. Again, this is not 100% confirmed, but this is just kind of the word that is spreading on social media right now. Some girls in Dubai have claimed that they've known these parties to involve some kind of beating of some sort. Now, no matter what kind of party this was that Maria attended, I think we can all agree that absolutely nothing warrants being left at the side of the road completely battered, bruised, with broken limbs. She had a broken spine and multiple broken limbs, and officials in Dubai were very quick, kind of suspiciously quick, to come out and declare that this was all an accident. They said she must have wandered into a construction area and had a fall from height. Everyone obviously felt that this was extremely unlikely, and also nobody knew how these Dubai officials seemed to know this so quickly. Maria was rushed to hospital and required 4 life-saving surgeries. She was in a coma but has now come out of this but is unable to speak. She'd reportedly previously told her mum that she was staying with 2 men who, quote, introduced themselves as representatives of the modelling business, end quote. Immediately after her attending the party, she just completely went off the radar and was uncontactable. She was found at the side of the road with no documents, no ID, no nothing. Now, this is incredibly disturbing, and apparently a trafficking case has been opened, and I'm sure more information will come out as we hear more about this. I'm really hoping that the truth comes out about what on earth happened here.
Elliot Rodger, the king of the incels, who killed as a form of revenge because no girls wanted to sleep with him. He killed because he thought that he was entitled to girls sleeping with him.
I'm 22 years old and still and has been very torturous. It's not fair. You denied me a happy life. And in turn, I will deny all of you life. It's only fair. I hate all of you.
Growing up, Elliot had the perfect childhood and a very privileged life. His parents were both very wealthy and well-connected. His father was the assistant director for the Hunger Games. Elliot's mom was friends with a ton of famous people. Here's a photo of her with Michael Jackson and George Lucas. His family lived in London and LA in big, beautiful, fancy homes. Elliot went on the most lavish vacations all around the world. But instead of being humble, Elliot liked to brag about his family's money and their social ranking, and he would judge anyone that he thought was below him. He was pretty much just a big jerk. We definitely all know the type. He got his self-worth from the things that he owned, from his parents' fancy homes to his parents' money and the fancy cars and designer clothes that his parents' money bought him. When Elliot was 7 years old, his parents did divorce. He blamed his mom for it too. He was really angry with her. His dad quickly moved on, got a new girlfriend. Elliot thought his dad was like cool for that. This woman would soon become Elliot's stepmom, and soon Elliot would have a new baby brother. In school, Elliot wanted to be one of like the popular kids, and he thought that he was entitled to be their friend and be in like the cool kid circle, and it became an obsession. That's like the thing about Elliot. He thinks he's entitled to all these things without making any effort to actually get them. Elliot wants all these cool friends, but no one wants to be Elliot's friend because he's a jerk talking about his parents' money all the time. Elliot also hated and resented girls, but he thought that he was entitled to them. In high school, when boys in Elliot's school started hooking up with girls, Elliot was mad and jealous because he wasn't doing that. But Elliot never went out of his way to talk to girls, ever, in his life. Elliot went to an all-boys private school. After school, he just hung out in his room alone all day playing video games. He hated girls, so he never talked to them, but still, he thought he was entitled to girls hooking up with him. He expected that girls would just approach him. Elliot has an inflated ego, and he thinks that he's the most perfect and attractive guy ever, and that he has all this money and nice cars and nice clothes, and he was shocked that all of these ugly guys were getting some and he wasn't. And Elliot began sharing all of these thoughts in videos that he would post online, and here's a few of them.
I'm such a magnificent guy. I'm beautiful. You can't deny that. I've traveled all over the world. I have so much to talk about. I don't know why you girls are so repulsed by me. It doesn't make sense. I do everything I can to appear attractive to you. I dress nice. I'm sophisticated and magnificent. I have a nice car, a BMW. The girls are not such attracted to me. And there's a major problem with that. A major problem. That's a problem that I intend to rectify. I, in all my magnificence and power, I will not let this fly. It's an injustice that needs to be dealt with.
Elliot hated girls because they wouldn't give him some, but he also hated everyone in relationships that were in love because they were getting some and he wasn't.
Look at them. He's in heaven right now, sitting on this beautiful beach with his beautiful girlfriend, kissing her, feeling her love, while I'm sitting here all alone because no beautiful girl wants to be my girlfriend. I hate them. I hate them so much. Why does he deserve to get that experience and not me? I can only imagine the heavenly things they'll be doing together when they go back home tonight. I'm sure they'll be having what will I be doing? Lying in my bed alone, with no one, because no one wants me.
He's such a creep. And Elliot had the same experience in college that he had in high school. He was a huge jerk, so no one wanted to be his friend and no one wanted to be his girlfriend. And he thought that he just deserved all those things. Elliot thought that the world was out to get him, even though he was super privileged, super rich. He drove really nice cars. He wore designer clothes. Elliot literally went to the world premiere of a bunch of nice movies like Hunger Games and all the Star Wars movies because of his parents' connections. He thought the world was out to get him because girls weren't throwing themselves at him, even though he's a huge jerk, openly talked about how much he hated women and wouldn't like talk to them. In 2013, Elliot was 21 years old and he found the online incel community, and I'm sure everyone watching this, if you've been online at all, you know what incels are, but if you don't, they are men that are involuntarily celibate, meaning that they want to be with girls in that kind of way, but no girls will be with them, like hook up with them. So these men go online to share their frustrations, their anger, their resentment, their self-pity, and their entitlement. It's literally Elliot, and it's the first time that he felt like he ever fit in. The longer Elliot went without like doing it, the angrier he got. He couldn't believe that he was 22 years old and he never did it before. Elliot got really into weapons and he started having really disturbing, violent fantasies about the revenge that he wanted to get against everyone. In 2014, Elliot wrote his manifesto. It's over 100,000 words about how awful women are to him and how he was going to get revenge and his plan to get revenge in what he called the Day of Retribution. The plan was to first kill his stepmom and his baby brother because he hated them and he hated that he he felt that his baby brother was growing up to be cooler than him. Then Elliot planned to kill his 2 college roommates, and then once his apartment didn't have his roommates in it anymore, he was going to lure dozens of people into his apartment, do the most terrible things to them that I've ever read, and then he was going to remove their heads. And this was just phase 1 of Elliot's plan. Phase 2 was that Elliot was going to go to the hottest sorority house in his college campus. He was going to kill all of them, and then he would just drive around running people over. He would then go to the main street of his town, throw all the heads of his victims onto the street to just horrify everyone, and then he would open fire with his weapons on everybody. May 23rd, 2014 was the day that Elliot planned to act out his day of retribution. He decided against hurting his stepmom and his stepbrother, but he did tragically take the lives of his 2 college roommates and their friend that they had over. And their names were Chung Yuen Hong, George Chen, and Wei Hung Wong. Elliot then posted his last video that he would ever post online, and that was the video that I showed you guys at the beginning of this video.
Hi, Elliot Roger here. Well, this is my last video. It all has to come to this. Tomorrow is the day of retribution. The day in which I will have my revenge against humanity. Against all of you. I'm 22 years old, and I'm still a virgin. It has been very torturous. It's not fair. You girls have never been attracted to me. I don't know why you girls aren't attracted to me, but I will punish you all for it. I don't know what you don't see in me. I'm the perfect guy, and yet you throw yourselves at all these obnoxious men. Instead of me, the supreme gentleman, I will punish all of you for it. You will finally see that I am, in truth, the superior one. The true alpha male. Yes. Well, now, I will be a god compared to you. You will all be animals. You denied me a happy life. And in turn, I will deny all of you life. It's only fair. I hate all of you. I've waited a long time for this. I can't wait to give you exactly what you deserve. Utter annihilation.
Only 1 minute after he uploaded that video online, he emailed 34 people his 137-page manifesto, and he emailed this to his parents, his old friends, his teachers, and some other family members. If you want to read his 137-page manifesto, it is online, but I do not suggest it. Elliot then drove to that sorority house, but the door was locked and no one would let him in. At that exact same moment, 3 beautiful girls were walking by the sorority house, so Elliot decided to use his weapon on them instead. Catherine Cooper and Veronica Wise lost their lives this way, and their 3rd friend was shot 5 times but survived. Elliot then drove around wherever he went, opening fire, and this is how he killed Christopher Martinez. Elliot is still driving, but the police are chasing him, and during this police chase, Elliot's car crashes. The police go up to his car, but by the time they get there, Elliot had already unalived himself. So he never had to face the evil things that he did. This case really blew up in the media, and a lot of the reason why incels are even like a known thing. And really disturbingly, a lot of men online actually defended and praised Elliot. Instead of blaming him for the lives that he stole, a lot of men online actually blamed women and girls, saying that all women could have prevented this if someone had just hooked up with him. And the men that think like that and say things like that are just as evil as Elliot, in my opinion. Just completely missed the point. And if you watch to the end of this video, please remember the victims: Christopher Martinez, Catherine Cooper, Veronica Weiss, George Chen, Wei Hung Wong, and Chung Yuen Hong. And I will see you guys all in my next video.
Of Nanjing. On January 19, 1996, a sanitary worker found a bag with what she thought was pork inside, brought it home, and when preparing the meat, found 3 human fingers. The police were alerted and soon found human remains at 8 different locations on and around the Nanjing University campus, all belonging to the same girl. 19-year-old student Diao Aiqing, who had disappeared 9 days prior. Her body had been cooked and cut up into more than 2,000 pieces. Critical organs such as her heart, liver, and spleen were never found, and because of the precision of the cuts, police concluded only someone with an extensive knowledge of anatomy, like a butcher or a surgeon, could have committed this crime. But more than 25 years later, it remains unsolved, and that's why
these are the top 7 most shocking crime documentaries. Number 7 is the Paradise Lost trilogy. To be honest, it shocked me right from the very first scene, where it actually shows the deceased victims at the crime scene. I will never get those images out of my head, so do be warned, it is very disturbing. The rest of the trilogy goes on to show the complete miscarriages of justice that went on. Number 6 is Abducted in Plain Sight, and this just had to make this list. If you've watched it, you know what I mean. The absolutely insane abuse that this victim went through is unbelievable. But what really disturbed me about this documentary is the parents' response. If you know, you know. The parents both had an incredibly disturbed relationship with the abuser. And the smile on the mum's face when she's reminiscing about this man who literally abused her daughter. Number 5 is Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. This series looks at Warren Jeffs and the FLDS. Themes of old men marrying teenagers, SAing people, brainwashing vulnerable people. Big trigger warning about the tapes that they actually play in this documentary. It really brings the whole thing to life in the most disgusting way. Number 4 is Life and Death Row Series 1 Episode 2 called Judgment. The documentary pretty much instantly starts with body cam footage of police going into a mass homicide scene. The images they show of those deceased people is literally burned into my brain. The 911 call from the scene is absolutely harrowing too. And not only that, but just the absolute jury bias that went on throughout this whole case and the incompetencies in the police investigation. If you don't have the BBC to actually access this documentary, I do a massive deep dive on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation. Number 3 is Captive Audience. Now, I don't hear a lot of people talking about this documentary, but it absolutely fascinated me. It had my jaw on the floor, and if you don't know the case of Steven Stainer, I advise you don't research it prior to watching this. It basically examines the case of a missing boy, and you think, okay, that's all that there is to this story, it's a missing boy. However, things just escalate, and you kind of feel like it's coming to a resolution, and then something horrific happens around the corner, and you feel like that's coming to a conclusion, and then something more horrific happens. The whole thing spans over decades, and it is just one of the most complex and crazy cases I've ever heard. Every time I thought I knew where this story was going, it surprised me again. Number 2 is The Jinx, and I'm talking about The Jinx Part 1 and Part 2 because I think they're both equally shocking, fascinating, gripping in different ways. I watched The Jinx Part 2 on my flight to Vegas, and I think it was something like a 12-hour flight, and honestly it went by in a flash because I was absolutely hooked. If you haven't seen The Jinx Part 1, I won't spoil anything about the case, but just go and watch it. It ends in the most insane way that I think I've ever seen a documentary end. It follows the case of Robert Durst, who's accused of killing several people. Now, Robert's actually involved in the documentary, which is what I think really sets it out from a lot of others. Usually, like, season 2 of documentaries like this are nowhere near as good as season 1, but I have no words. I was honestly on the edge of my seat throughout the whole of season 2. And controversial maybe, but I had to give the number 1 spot to Evil Genius. The reason why is just the shocking footage that they showed in this documentary that I honestly remember watching it with my friend, and we were both saying, no, there's no way they're going to show this, there's no way, and then they did. It truly scarred me for a long time. I kept waking up in cold sweats. I also just think the crime itself is so cruel and elaborate and detailed. So yes, this left me absolutely speechless. Their 5-year-old daughter rang police to say that they were dead, like it just doesn't even bear thinking about. Her tiny little voice saying that blood was coming out of her dad's mouth. It was around 3 a.m. on the 28th of March 2005 when a 911 operator got a call from a very little voice. In the heartbreaking phone call, 5-year-old Tia Hernlin stated that she had just found her parents on the floor. Her parents were Julie and Aeneas Hernlin, and they'd met back when Aeneas was working as a lifeguard in Daytona Beach, Florida, and there was just an instant spark between them. They really loved spending time in the outdoors, especially surfing as they're pictured here. They soon wanted to get married, and they were also keen for a family, so they ended up having a baby together, which was Tia. All 3 of them were a super happy family, but it was really important that they also focused on their individual goals, and Julie was working towards becoming a paralegal. But everything would come crashing down on the day in question. Now, little Tia made the phone call and reported to the operator that she'd heard a loud noise and found a bullet on the floor. The dispatcher spoke to the child and tried to kind of reassure her during this incredibly traumatic time. Police raced to the property and Tia was removed from the bloodbath. She was kind of held in a police car by the officers. They just didn't really know what to do with this child. Julie, her mum, was tragically pronounced dead right there and then at the scene, and Aeneas was rushed to hospital. There was unfortunately no saving him though, and he did end up passing away from his injuries. So what on earth had happened here at this house? Well, police looked through their records and discovered that in early 2005, Julie had reported an issue to the police. She told them how a man had been stalking and harassing her. This man was 33-year-old David Johnson, and I struggled to actually find a picture of him. He was actually known to police, though. He'd been arrested on substance charges. Now, David believed Julie to be responsible for this, but this was not the case at all, and I'm not really sure why he thought that she was. Nevertheless, he blamed Julie and was insistent on making the pair's life hell. He made threatening phone calls to the couple and was constantly just driving by their house really eerily, just making them feel very on edge. But then Julie went to police to try and gain a restraining order. You know, we're always told to do that, aren't we? We're told to report things to police and the police will take care of it. The police, in fact, did not take care of it. The judge in the case said no to a restraining order. The judge was adamant that no violence had occurred and said that they couldn't really prove that he'd been stalking them. So sickeningly, David was free to just continue his reign of terror. And Julie just had this gut feeling that things were going to end in tears, and she was correct. In a chilling foreshadowing, she'd actually told one of her friends, "If I end up dead, David is to blame." Now, police knew that David was likely to be responsible for this horrific double murder, so they had to take action now. They knew that with the history of the stalking and harassment allegations, he was the likely only suspect. They headed to his house. They wanted to try and question him and see what was going on. But when they knocked the door, they had no reply. In the end, they found him inside the property, deceased, having unalived himself.
This man killed his fiancée 2 days before their wedding. Molly Watson was a proud, self-proclaimed geek. She was very much herself. She liked being unique and different. She wasn't afraid to be an individual, which I think is a really great quality. She was also crazy smart and successful. She had 2 degrees, a bachelor's and a master's in psychology, and was going towards a second master's degree, which is just insanely impressive. Molly got married very young and unfortunately did go towards divorce, but while she was divorcing her ex-husband, Molly found out that she was pregnant with their son. Molly still went forward with the divorce anyways, and she was ready to start this new life. She ended up getting a new job, and it was at that new job she met one of her coworkers, this man named James Addy. James was 16 years older than Molly, but there was an instant connection and the two started dating. At the time that James and Molly met, James was in the middle of divorcing his soon-to-be ex-wife. It was taking a while because they had 2 kids together. People in Molly's life said they never saw her more happy and in love than she was with James. The 2 of them seemed like a good couple. They were really into each other, but those closest to Molly did not like James. They never did. They said there was something off about him. In October of 2017, James was officially divorced from his ex-wife, and after 7 long years of dating, James and Molly got engaged. This would be James's 5th marriage. This was the happiest time in Molly's life, planning this wedding. She was so excited, so happy. She got a wedding planner, she went dress shopping, but only 2 months later, something awful happened. James's ex-wife, Melanie, who he just divorced, got in this terrible car accident. She was in critical condition and on life support. It really wasn't looking good, but James and Molly decided to still go forward with their wedding as planned. The location was already booked. The date was already set for April 29th, 2018. And then only 1 week before James and Molly's wedding, James's ex-wife Melanie passed away. But they were still gonna go forward with the wedding. It was only 7 days away at this point. And then on April 25th, James and Molly went and got their marriage license. Molly Watson is only 4 days away from her fairy tale wedding and marrying the love of her life. Or so she thought. Because only 2 days later, on April 27th, 2018, only 2 days before what was supposed to be James and Molly's wedding, Molly Watson was found dead on an isolated dirt back road. She had been shot in the back of the head. Molly's car was parked near her body, so the first responding officers thought at first that maybe this was a robbery gone wrong. But Molly was still wearing her engagement ring, so it didn't make sense that this would be a robbery gone wrong because you'd expect a thief to steal something expensive like an engagement ring. James and Molly's marriage license was still in the front seat of Molly's car, so the first responding officers now realize that they have to go and tell Molly Watson's fiance that his bride has been murdered 2 days before their wedding. The police went to the home of James Addy to tell him the tragic news, but what they got was the shock of a lifetime. Because guess who opened the door? James's dead ex-wife Melanie, who was very much not dead and was still married to James. And if you're confused, imagine how confused Melanie and the police were. The police were there to talk to Molly Watson's fiance, and what they found was his wife, who was supposed to be his ex-wife and also dead. So it turns out James Addy was living a double life. James was dating Molly Watson for over 7 years. They were engaged a few days from a wedding. He lied to her for years, said he divorced his ex-wife and she was dead. The entire time he's still married, very much still married to his wife Melanie, the mother of his 2 children. And James's wife Melanie is shocked. 1, she never expected that her husband would be the kind of guy to cheat. 2, she never expected that he was cheating. She never saw any signs. She found out all at once that her husband of 23 years had been cheating on her for the past 7 years. That he was engaged to that woman, planned an entire wedding with her, and that woman was just found murdered 2 days before his wedding to her, and now he's a suspect for murder. And she never expected it. There were no signs that her husband was cheating, let alone all of that. I would end up thinking that I'm in the Twilight Zone, that I went into some parallel universe. And James was clearly arrested for the murder of Molly Watson. He had no alibi the night that she was murdered. He said he was out with friends, and he was out of the house during the time, but then his friends that he was supposed to be with said that they were not with him. His vehicle's tires matched perfectly to tire marks found at the scene, and one of his shirts was found near Molly's body. The theory was that either Molly Watson found out that James was lying, was living this double life, and confronted him, because turns out the day before Molly Watson was murdered, she was Googling multiple times for James's ex-wife's obituary and couldn't find it because it did not exist because she was still alive. Or that James had lied himself into a corner and had run out of time and didn't know what to do and thought that this was the only way out. Because in reality, what was James's plan? Was this always gonna end in murder in James's mind? Because if he didn't kill Molly and they got married on April 29th, she'd expect him to live with her and be with her full time, but then how would he explain that to his other wife and his 2 children? Did James lie until he couldn't anymore and then had to choose which life and which wife he wanted more? James Addy was found guilty and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, although he still continues to claim that he's innocent. I really hate this guy because he could have just let Molly Watson alone. He didn't have to pursue her. He didn't have to get engaged to her. He led Molly Watson on for 7 years, all the way up until it was 2 days before she thought she was gonna get married, have this fairy tale ending, and then he took her life. And he also took a mother away from her son. It really doesn't get any more evil than that. And if you watched the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Molly Watson's story. I will see you guys tomorrow with another video.
It just doesn't make sense. This case is strange. Joshua Maddox went missing in 2008, and he wasn't found until 2015. When an unused cabin a quarter mile away from his home was being demolished, his body was found inside the chimney with his knees above his head, and the police ruled it an accidental death, and they said he climbed in from the top and got stuck. But that doesn't explain how he got in the chimney, because there was a metal grate on top of it blocking the entrance, and he couldn't have gone in through the fireplace because there was a heavy breakfast bar that had been ripped out of the wall and pushed in front of it. Or why he was only wearing a shirt. All his other clothes were folded up inside the cabin. So he would have had to have been inside the cabin, taken off his clothes, gone outside, climbed up on the roof, and then tried to enter the cabin again through the chimney?
This woman is accused of murdering her boyfriend, but is she actually being framed in an elaborate conspiracy? That's the question at the center of one of the most bizarre cases in recent memory, with more twists and turns than you could ever believe. Karen Reed was in a 2-year-long relationship with John O'Keefe, a Boston police officer. The two were seemingly a great couple with a happy relationship, but things took a dark turn on the night of January 28th, 2022. The couple went out drinking with friends despite a terrible blizzard predicted for that evening. After the bars, the two were invited out to an after party at the home of a Boston police sergeant. Karen claims that she saw her boyfriend John enter the house party and then she drove home. The next morning, when Karen woke up to no signs that her boyfriend ever came home and he wasn't answering his phone, she got really worried. In a panic, she returned back to the home of the house party to search for her boyfriend, but what she found was a nightmare. John's lifeless body laying face up in the snow on the front yard of the house party. When the first responders arrived, many claimed to hear Karen screaming that she had hit John with her car. They believed that his injuries were consistent with a hit and run, and to make matters worse, some pieces of her broken taillight were found at the scene. And none of the people that were at the house party remembered seeing John enter the house. It seemed like a straightforward case. Karen and John were fighting that day. Instead of John ever making it inside of the house party, Karen, in a fit of rage, hit him with her car, panicked, and left him to die in the snow. Karen, however, swore up and down that she saw her boyfriend John enter the home of the house party. And if that's true, that means that someone inside the party had to know what happened to him. And then Karen's defense team uncovered a shocking revelation. A phone at the party had allegedly been used hours before John's body was found to search how long to die in cold. That discovery, combined with other evidence, pointed to possible police corruption and a deliberate attempt to frame Karen. Was Karen Reed the victim of a massive cover-up orchestrated by those in positions of power? Did Karen Reed kill her boyfriend John O'Keefe, or was she being framed for murder? Take a deep dive into all the behind-the-scenes action of this case. Its jaw-dropping moments, the many twists, and the media circus that surrounds it in the 3-day premiere of A Body in the Snow, the trial of Karen Reed, starting on March 17th on Investigation Discovery and streaming on Max. This docuseries is a must-see.
It was you guys that found the body of this missing girl. Now, tragically, this case ended in disaster, but if it wasn't for social media, she wouldn't have been found. It was the 6th of August, 2022 in Truckee, California. The area is super rural, and it's common for teenagers to kind of hang out in the woods and in the outdoor areas. Especially in the summer as well, like there's really lovely, gorgeous open spaces, outdoor areas near to like reservoirs and things where kids just love to hang out. On the day in question, they were doing just that. Kylie Rodney, aged 16, was with a bunch of other teenagers heading to an outdoor party. She was just about to start music college and she was incredibly talented. As you can see, she was gorgeous, and everybody who knew her just described her as this lovely, warm character, just such a ball of energy. Kylie and her friends headed to a campground by a reservoir and all started partying together. There ended up being over 300 people at this party. Now, mostly they were teenagers, but there were some other older guys there as well. And unfortunately, there was a lot of underage drinking going on and underage substance taking as well. Eyewitnesses from the gathering reported seeing Kylie kind of late on into the evening, looking a little bit worse for wear, kind of like stumbling over her feet a little bit. Then she vanished. She had apparently decided to drive home on her own under the influence back to her parents' house, but tragically she never made it. Her parents were obviously extremely worried the next day when she just hadn't returned and she hadn't even gone to stay with her friends or anything like that. There was absolutely no sign of her, so they ended up reporting her missing to police. An absolutely huge search began and loads of local volunteers joined in with the police forces to try and find the missing teenager. That's when horrific rumours started circulating that maybe this was something to do with the older guys at the party. There were whispers that these guys were even seen giving substances to young girls. And police actually asked people at the party to come forward, anybody who was at the gathering, come and talk to us, tell us what you know. But people stayed suspiciously quiet. This only added fuel to the fire of those rumours that somehow someone was involved. So investigators looked into where Kylie's phone last pinged, and they found out that it pinged at 12:33 a.m. near that campground and then just went dead. This is where TikTok came in and really saved the day. An account called Adventures with Purpose is a voluntary organisation that posts on social media like YouTube and TikTok. They stepped in to help with the search. Now, they have amazing equipment which can be used to kind of facilitate searches like this, and they're largely funded by the public, by donations they get off TikTok. And they were the ones who found Kylie. She was submerged inside her vehicle in Prosser Lake. Her cause of death was deemed accidental drowning. Now, despite the rumours, police state that there is no evidence of any kind of foul play.
He's known as the Brain Eater and the most dangerous prisoner in the UK. Robert Maudsley holds the world record for the longest time spent in solitary confinement. He's been in solitary confinement for 46 years. They keep him in a glass cage underground behind 17 locked doors because he's seen as so dangerous. Just a very quick warning before we get into all the details. In this case, we are going to talk about the abuse and SA of children. Robert Maudsley and his siblings were removed from their parents' custody when Robert was only 6 months old due to severe neglect and abuse. So Robert and his siblings grew up in an orphanage, but this was actually a really happy time because it was the first time they were ever actually treated well. And this life was all that Robert ever knew because he was taken from his parents when he was a baby. But when Robert was 9 years old, his parents decided that they wanted their kids back. And these people are complete strangers to Robert, and they're still super neglectful and abusive. The house was disgusting, and Robert got the worst of his father George's abuse because he was always trying to help his siblings. Robert's father, George, is an absolute monster. He actually began to SA 9-year-old Robert. And then within only 1 year of living with his parents, Robert was either removed from his parents' custody once again, or he was sent back to the orphanage by his parents. And then by the age of 16, Robert was alone living on the streets. He got into substances and got into work just to survive. And it was at some point while Robert was living on the streets that he was SA'd again. Robert's really depressed, he's really struggling with his mental health, and he actually tried to seek help. He was in and out of different psychiatric facilities, and he repeatedly told the doctors that he was hearing voices telling him to kill his parents, but no one did anything about it. And then in March of 1974, Robert is 20 years old and he's with a client, a 30-year-old man named John Farrell. Two of them are in bed, they're doing stuff, and then out of nowhere, the client, John, gets out of bed, he goes over to his dresser and grabs a stack of photos and shows them to Robert. And these photos were of this man SAing multiple children. I guess because Robert was homeless and an worker, this client thought that he would be okay with this. But this brought Robert right back to when he was a child being SA'd by his father. Robert just snapped and he killed his client. And afterwards, he didn't even try to cover it up. 20-year-old Robert went to the police and he turned himself in. It was determined, however, that Robert was unfit to stand trial because he wasn't sane. So Robert was sent to the first ever asylum for the criminally insane. And at this hospital, Robert lived a good handful of years, but he made it very clear that he hated people who committed SA crimes, especially towards children. And then in 1977, at the age of 23 years old, Robert met another patient at this psychiatric facility, and his name was David Allen Francis. And David is a convicted PDF file who Robert hates. They remind him of his father, who the voices in his head tell him to kill. Robert tells another patient at the hospital that he wants to kill David, and the other patient is down to help him. So the two of them begin planning. Robert steals a plastic spoon from the kitchen and files down the handle of the spoon to be a sharp weapon. And by the way, the other patient that's gonna help Robert kill David is also named David, so just to make it easier, I'm gonna call him other patient. And then one day when the three men are alone together, Robert locks them in a room, and then him and other patient attack David. This is a brutal, vicious, long attack that lasted 9 hours. The entire time the hospital staff is trying to get into this room because it's supposed to be a high security mental health hospital. And after 9 hours of vicious, brutal attack, David passed away. Afterwards, Robert just calmly opens the door and walks out, like nothing happened. The scene that the hospital staff saw inside this room was horrific. I mean, just imagine, it lasted 9 hours. I don't even think I could explain how brutal of a scene this was. But there was a spoon nearby, and because of what terrible of a condition David's body was left in after 9 hours, the hospital staff actually believed that Robert had eaten David's brain. This was a rumor, but the media ran with it. And although Robert was previously deemed unfit to stand trial, this crime literally happened in a psychiatric hospital. Robert was now deemed fit to stand trial, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and he would serve that in a real prison. And it just so happened that this prison happened to have a large amount of criminals who committed SA crimes. And we know how Robert feels about them. Within 1 year of being in this prison, Robert's still hearing the voices, and he begins planning another attack. Once again, he gets his hand on a plastic spoon and he files down the handle to be a sharp weapon. Robert lured an inmate into his cell named Senley Darwood. This man was in prison for the death of his wife, but he was a registered SA offender. Robert attacked him with his spoon, and after it was done, Robert shoved his body under his bed, cleaned himself up, and then went out looking for another victim because Robert was not done. Robert walked into the cell of another inmate named William Roberts. This man was in prison for the crimes he committed against children. Robert attacked him with his spoon in an absolute frenzy. And after, just like before, Robert doesn't try to cover up his crimes. He walks straight up to the prison guard, hands him his makeshift weapon, and says, "Looks like you'll be short 2 on roll call later." Again, Robert shows no remorse. He thinks that him taking out people who've committed crimes against children is him doing the world a favor. But this time, it was decided that Robert was just too dangerous to be around other inmates. Robert, at the age of 25 years old, was put in solitary confinement. This is when a prisoner is put in a small dark cell and is given no interaction with any other person indefinitely. And solitary confinement is well known to really mess with the human mind, not being able to speak to anyone for long periods of time. It's still widely used today, even though it's very controversial, and a lot of people see it as cruel and unusual punishment. Eventually, the prison built Robert his very own solitary confinement cell. It's a very small glass cage, so Robert can be monitored 24/7. He gets no privacy. The cage is underground, and you have to go through 17 locked doors just to get there. His bed is a concrete block. He gets no sunlight. He's completely isolated. Not even the prison guards are allowed to talk to him. This is the last photo taken of Robert. It was taken all the way back in the 80s. There is 0 documented photos taken of Robert since then, or of his underground prison cell. All we know is that the cell for Hannibal Lecter in the Silence of the Lamb movie is inspired by Robert's cell. For years, Robert tried to deny his stay in solitary confinement, but it's always been denied. And to this day, in this exact moment, Robert Maudsley is still in solitary confinement. He was put in solitary confinement when he was 25 years old. He is 71 years old today. He's been in solitary confinement for 46 years. He holds the world record for the longest time in solitary confinement. At some point, the prison gave him like a TV and a PlayStation, stuff like that, but then they just randomly took them back. This is a very recent update from just this month. And Robert has just given up, and he's currently on a hunger strike. Have you guys ever heard this case before? When I was reading it for the first time, my jaw was literally on the floor. Have you guys heard this case before? What are your thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments. While you're there, tell me what case you want to see me cover next. And until then, I will see you guys tomorrow with another video.
Just 48 hours after her wedding, she was found murdered in a bathtub, still wearing her wedding dress. It was the 12th of May 2012 in Illinois. Estrella Carrera, age 26, and Arnaldo Jimenez, age 30, had just tied the knot. They already had an absolutely beautiful family together. Estrella and Arnaldo had a 2-year-old son together, and Estrella also had an 8-year-old from a previous marriage. They met at a nightclub years earlier and immediately became infatuated with each other. They felt the logical next step was to get married in a gorgeous ceremony to celebrate their love and make things legally binding. The bride looked absolutely stunning on CCTV as she was spotted leaving a bar the night of her wedding, but it would be the last time she was spotted alive. It was actually the next day that police were called, and they were called because Estrella was due to pick her children up from her dad's house and never showed up. Her sister was really concerned about this because Estrella was a great mum. She was never late for anything. She would always be where she said she was going to be, especially regarding things around her children. So where was she? Well, her family and friends tried all desperately to get hold of her via telephone, and she just wasn't answering. Some of them even showed up to her house and banged on the door, and they got no response. Something was clearly wrong, and worries only grew when people started hearing whispers about the fact that an argument had been spotted the night prior, because the relationship between these two was far from perfect. In fact, they'd been a bit on and off, and they'd kind of split up and got back together a couple of times. And when they'd announced their engagement, some people didn't even realise they were back together. The wedding itself had even been somewhat of a surprise to people. They'd just kind of had a text about like a celebration of some sort, and they'd showed up and it was these two's wedding. It was all pretty last minute and pretty strange, to be honest. Like I said, they'd been to bars that night. They'd been partying, going from club to club. They'd been chauffeured around all different areas of Chicago and then kind of called it a night at about 4 a.m. Then there was a really shocking revelation from Arnaldo's sister. She reportedly got a call from him and she said he sounded like he'd been crying. He told her that the pair had got into an argument and he'd left her bleeding. He then just hung up the phone and wouldn't answer, and he was completely uncontactable. Police headed over to the pair's apartment. They knew that they actually needed to probably just break the door down and see what was going on inside. And when they arrived at the apartment in Burbank, nobody could have prepared them for what they were about to find. In the bathtub was the bloodied body of this new bride. She was still in her beautiful sequined wedding dress. She'd clearly been the victim of an absolutely brutal attack. She had 18 stab wounds. Interestingly though, what the detectives were able to see from the crime scene was there was no blood spatter on the walls. It kind of seemed like she'd been killed elsewhere and then transferred to the pair's apartment. And there was no sign of any kind of break-in, any kind of forced entry. So that led the police, along with obviously the suspicious things that he'd been saying, to presume that Arnaldo might be responsible. Then Estrella's friends told officers something. Estrella had confided in them and said that she was only getting married to him because he'd threatened her. They said that he had told her he'd take her kids away if she didn't. This was kind of painting a picture that this really hadn't been a picture-perfect happy relationship like some people thought. There had also been a history of violence too, and Arnaldo had an extensive criminal record including violent charges and substance offences. But by now he was on the run. He'd already fled to Mexico and police believed that his brother had helped him. But they really just couldn't track him down and he remained a fugitive for 13 years. But it wasn't until his brother got in trouble with police for something kind of unrelated to this case that they searched his property and found Arnaldo's car. This car was hidden at the house and it's reportedly absolutely littered with forensic evidence. It's reported that there's loads of forensics linking Arnaldo to his wife's murder. He was finally apprehended and is being held in Mexican jail until his trial. Imagine spotting a girl getting kidnapped at the side of the road and then realising later that that was your sister. It was the 26th of February 1970 in Littleton, Colorado. Marilee Burt was a 9th grade student at Goddard Junior High School. Now she was a beautiful girl, as you can see, and she was also very athletic and talented. She was popular, she had loads of friends, she loved socialising, and she just had a bright future ahead of her. She was a great swimmer and an excellent skier. She also really loved getting involved in after-school activities, and in particular cheerleading. She also had a really lovely, caring family. They were pretty well off and owned some local car sales rooms, and her mum usually actually ferried her to and from her after-school activities. On the day in question, Marilee stayed after school for a basketball game that she was cheerleading at. Straight after this, she went to a nearby friend's house to just kind of chill there for a little bit and wait for a lift. Now remember, this is back in the 70s, back way before we had mobile phones, so Marilee called her mum from a landline from her friend's house and asked for a lift. However, there was a little bit of a miscommunication and I think her mum presumed that she meant to have a lift from the school, so her mum got in her car and headed on towards the school. But she obviously couldn't see Marilee anywhere because she was at her friend's house. And she couldn't just give her another call and check where she was or text her because there were no phones, so she got out of her vehicle and she went into the school to try and look. But obviously she had no luck, and meanwhile Marilee must have been kind of wondering what was taking her mum so long and decided to just walk home by herself instead. Now it was a 2-mile journey home and Marilee only had little legs. She was 5'4", I'm 5'4", and 2 miles would be a nightmare after school. It was also 6:45 by this point and it was February, so it was getting dark. The decision to walk home rather than to wait at the friend's house would prove to be fatal. Marilee's older brother, Ramon, just so happened to be driving home that day along the same road, and he noticed something. Now, it was pretty dark, like I said, so his vision was slightly impaired, but he saw a girl in pigtails and a cheerleading outfit. He didn't know at the time that this was his sister. He noticed her speaking to a van driver, and he managed to get a good look at this van driver. He was a white male with dark brown hair and long sideburns. But he didn't really think too much of this. Like I said, you know when you're kind of driving home after work work or something and you're just kind of in a bit of a daze. You notice things but you don't really think too much into them. Well, he got home after this and realised his sister was not home and that was his sister he'd seen at the side of the road. He got straight back in his car. He thought this was really weird that she would be randomly talking to a man. So he got back in his car, he drove to the exact same spot, and this was only 5 minutes later, but they'd vanished. Ramon was literally, obviously, as you would be, beating yourself up about this. Like, he was thinking, why didn't I just pull over initially when I saw this? But I think it's one of those cases where hindsight is 20/20 and he wasn't to know at the time. Marilee never came home that night, and tragically the following day a horrific discovery was made. The body was found nearby, crumpled up with no clothes on. She'd clearly been the victim of a brutal attack and SA. She'd been strangled to death with rope that was still around her neck. Now obviously police seized this rope and they took it off for analysis, but the technology really wasn't very good back then at all. Police also started looking into offenders in the area and did identify one man of interest. This was Ronald Bloom. Now disturbingly, he was a local gymnastics instructor at Marilee's school, and he had a history of offences dating all the way back to the 50s. Why on earth was he able to be a gymnastics instructor at a school with a history like this? Now Marilee, like I said, was very athletic. She was involved in the gymnastics at school, so there's a high likelihood she knew him. In fact, when this man was confronted by police and brought in for questioning, he said something incredibly disturbing. He said he had a problem with picking up young girls and SAing them in his car. The police were absolutely convinced that this was their man. This was the person who had murdered Marilee. But they tested his DNA versus the DNA they found at the scene, and it didn't match. And obviously they were thinking, maybe we've done something wrong, maybe we've made an error here, let's test it again just because we're so convinced. But again, it wasn't a match. They clearly had the wrong guy despite the disturbing things he'd said in the police interview. Now, I don't know why he's not put away in prison after saying something so disturbing. Testing ruled out at least 7 suspects by 1998, but did not successfully find any matches. Chillingly, this murder case remains unsolved, and over the years they've hiked the reward money up and up and up in the hopes that somebody will come forward. The fact her mum wasn't there at the location to pick her up haunted her for the rest of her life.
This man deformed his own face to try to get away with murder. Tatsuya Ichihashi approached American Lindsay Hawker under the pretense of wanting English lessons. On March 24, 2007, he lured her to his Tokyo apartment where he sexually assaulted and strangled her. 2 days later, police found her body in a bathtub filled with sand and compost soil on his balcony. He had attempted to speed up decomposition. Tatsuya went on the run, and to make his face less recognizable, he sliced off his moles with a box cutter, used scissors to cut off parts of his lips, and tried to give himself a nose job using a needle and thread. Ironically, it was when he had plastic surgery to evade capture that the staff became suspicious and sent police a photo of his new appearance. Leading to his capture after 2.5 years on the run, he was sentenced to life in prison. On June 29, 2003, a 14-year-old boy named John was rushed to the hospital with stab wounds to the chest and stomach. When officers examined the CCTV footage, they saw a 16-year-old boy named Mark enter the alleyway shortly before John was attacked. They discovered that Mark, for the past 6 months, had been spending almost 12 hours a day on an internet chat room, talking to a variety of people, including a British secret agent, who gave him a mission to kill John, and if Mark was successful, he would be able to meet the Prime Minister and be given £500,000. The only problem was that all the people Mark was talking to were characters created by John, who became the first person in UK history to be convicted of inciting his own murder. On February 18, 2003, a man boarded a Daegu Metro subway train carrying a duffel bag. Inside were 2 milk cartons filled with flammable liquid. When the train arrived at Jungano Station, he set it on fire and escaped out the doors. The resulting blaze then spread when a second train stopped alongside the first. 192 people were killed and another 151 were injured. Most were burned so badly that they could only be identified through DNA. The arsonist was identified as Kim Dae-han, a 56-year-old 30-year-old unemployed taxi driver who had become depressed after suffering complications from a stroke and had expressed a desire to kill himself in a crowded place so he wouldn't die alone. This remains South Korea's deadliest mass murder committed by a single perpetrator. What really happened to Maddie Bosch, a police officer who was abducted from her home while investigating a serial rapist? Was she getting too close to his identity, or is something larger at play, like her being a key witness in a wrongful death case against the LAPD? In cases of abduction, time is against the victim, and no one knows that better than her father, Harry Bosch, a private investigator and former LAPD detective. He's a man who won't let anything stop him from finding his daughter, even the law. He's also the main character of Bosch Legacy on Amazon Freevee. Get ready for a wild ride because Season 2 just got released. Stream on Freevee or wherever Prime Video is available.
Gaslighting people into committing mass murder is absolutely wild. Jeffrey Lundgren was raised as a member of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or RLDS for short. These guys are always involved in crime cases. He wasn't a particularly well-liked child. Most regarded him as kind of arrogant, and he just didn't make friends very easily. When he was at uni, he met a fellow RLDS member, Alice Keeler, and they seemed to be perfect for one another. They decided to start a family and fell pregnant fairly quickly. They then decided to make things official legally and got married. And then Jeffrey joined the Royal Navy in the 70s. However, he was honorably discharged and his life kind of took a downward spiral at this point. He would end up getting jobs and then getting fired because he was found out to be stealing from the companies. He just kind of kept repeating this cycle, never learning his lesson, and therefore really never had stable employment. And his relationship was going downhill too. Like I said, Jeffrey was arrogant. He wasn't a particularly nice man. He had this god complex about him where he felt he was the most important person in the world and everybody else just kind of had to bow down to him. He was treating his wife accordingly. He was gaslighting her into thinking that everything was her fault and that he was this important prophet. He once beat her so badly she ended up in hospital, but their family continued growing and they ended up having 4 children together, and I can't bear thinking about the abuse that the children must have witnessed in that household. Now, without a proper job, Jeffrey decided to up and move his family to Kirtland, Ohio in 1984. He'd been offered a job at a temple there, and like I said, he was really struggling to get any kind of employment because of his history. But yet again, he was in this cycle of get a job, start stealing, and then lose that job. And it didn't change at the temple. He did the exact same thing. He was eventually found to have been stealing over $40,000 in donations to the temple. You would kind of think that amount of money, the temple might take some kind of legal action and he would finally be stopped once and for all. But that isn't what happened at all. They kind of just shooed him away and said, as long as you just leave and don't trouble us anymore, then we won't do anything. But they had no idea just how popular Jeffrey had been in the temple. He managed to brainwash a really large group of people at the temple into believing he was this prophet. So when he left the temple, these people felt that he was their spiritual leader, so they followed him. He pretty much formed this small cult following. He moved loads of them with his family into their new house. Now, they actually believed that they were joining this kind of arts community and that they were going to do a lot of work for disadvantaged people. That was absolutely not the case. Jeffrey had just gaslit them into believing this. It was way darker than they could ever have imagined. Gradually, he was kind of asking more and more of them and just making them bow down to his every wish. They were even all calling him Dad. He was essentially making them go out and earn money and then come home and give him their money. He would then start making crazy demands and gradually got the women to perform nude for him sometimes. He was kind of getting away with this just because of how brainwashed everybody had become. He would also sneak up on them and eavesdrop on their conversations and then use that information to make them believe that he could read their minds. However, 5 members of the group were actually a little bit skeptical of Jeffrey, which was obviously a good thing. They struggled to integrate with this new community and ended up refusing to move in with them. This was Dennis Avery and his family, his wife Cheryl and his daughters Trina, Rebecca and Karen. Now, in Jeffrey's eyes, they had disobeyed him. And like I said, these people were going out, earning money, and then giving it to Jeffrey. So that was a massive blow for him to just not have their money anymore. And Dennis was a massive financial contributor. Dennis had said he just wanted to make some money for him and his family, but Jeffrey was enraged by this. In 1989, Jeffrey cooked up an evil plan. He convinced his followers that Christ was going to return and that a day of reckoning was ahead. He began training the males up to be these kind of like military warriors. He taught them to use weapons and said to be prepared for some kind of military combat. He eventually announced that they were going to have to make a human sacrifice. He prepared them to storm the Kirtland Temple and kill anyone who got in their way, but thankfully this plan came to a halt because one member fled and told police. The plan was paused, but not for long. Jeffrey knew the police were monitoring him closely, but it did little to deter him from his sick plans. He made all of the other members dig a pit and told them that this would be where they would bury the Avery family. He told all of his followers that if they wanted to get to heaven, they had to obey. On the 17th of April 1989, it was time. The Avery family were lured to the farmhouse, and once they were arrived, they were tied up, gagged, and then shot. They dumped their bodies in the grave that they had dug previously. Jeffrey then left Ohio. He was pretty scared. He knew that the police were onto him, and if they caught wind of this, that they would be right over there to arrest him. He pretty much abandoned his cult members as well and was paranoid that he would be found. Ultimately, though, the police did receive a tip-off. When officers arrived at the farmhouse in January 1990, they found the bodies of the entire Avery family. The abandoned cult members helped police to locate Jeffrey and his wife, and Jeffrey was given the death penalty. In October 2006, Jeffrey was executed.